Imagine a 13-year-old boy, sitting in front of a clunky teletype machine in 1968, completely mesmerized. He skips lunch. He skips gym class. He stays after school until they literally force him to leave. What he doesn't know yet is that this obsession will change the world forever. That boy was William Henry Gates III, or simply, Bill Gates. Today, you know him as one of the richest people on earth, the co-founder of Microsoft, and a philanthropist dedicated to fighting diseases across the globe. But his story is far more than just wealth and success. It's a tale of early obsession, ruthless ambition, controversial decisions, and ultimately, a massive shift toward redemption. How did a college dropout outmaneuver giants like IBM? What made him one of the most feared competitors in business history? And why did he eventually walk away from running the world's most powerful software company to dedicate himself to giving away his fortune? This is Bill Gates, the architect of the digital revolution. If you enjoy audiobooks, please like, share, and subscribe to Ecolib for more inspiring biographies. Now, let's begin where it all started, in Seattle, Washington. Chapter 1: Childhood in Seattle. William Henry Gates III entered the world on October 28, 1955, in Seattle, Washington. It's a name that carries weight, isn't it? The third in a line, suggesting legacy, expectation, tradition. And young Bill would both honor and rebel against those expectations in ways his parents couldn't have imagined. Seattle in the 1950s was a city of promise and possibility. Boeing was transforming the region into an aerospace powerhouse, bringing prosperity and growth. The city sat nestled between the Cascade Mountains and the stunning waters of Puget Sound, a place where nature met opportunity. It was a comfortable, optimistic time in America, and the Gates family embodied that post-war prosperity. Standing 6 feet 6 inches tall, Bill's father, William H. Gates Sr., was an imposing figure who commanded attention simply by entering a room. Yet, it was his character and intellect that truly distinguished him. Bill Sr. was a prominent attorney in Seattle, building a successful practice in corporate law. He had come from modest beginnings and worked his way up through determination and integrity. He believed deeply in public service, in civic responsibility, and in using success to help others. Bill's mother, Mary Maxwell Gates, brought a different dimension to the family. She came from a well-established Seattle banking family, with social connections and a deep understanding of how institutions and organizations worked. Mary was energetic, organized, and driven. She served on numerous corporate boards and charitable organizations. She had high standards and, crucially, even higher expectations for her children. In the Gates household, excellence wasn't just encouraged, it was assumed. Together, Bill's parents created an environment that was both nurturing and demanding. The Gates home in Seattle's Laurelhurst neighborhood was comfortable but wasn't ostentatious. Bill grew up with his older sister Christy Ann, known as Christy, and his younger sister Libby. The three Gates children were raised in an atmosphere where intellectual curiosity was celebrated and mediocrity was simply not acceptable. Family dinners at the Gates household were unlike those in most American homes. These weren't quiet affairs where children were seen and not heard. Instead, they were lively, often heated debates about current events, ethical questions, and big ideas. Bill's parents believed in engaging their children's minds, in teaching them to think critically and defend their positions with logic and evidence. Young Bill thrived in this environment. Even as a small child, he showed a hunger for knowledge that seemed insatiable. While other children his age were content with picture books, Bill preferred encyclopedias. His parents would find him curled up with volume after volume, absorbing information about everything from ancient civilizations to modern science. His grandmother later recalled discovering young Bill methodically working his way through the entire World Book Encyclopedia, reading it cover to cover as if it were a novel. When she asked him why he was doing this, he looked at her as if the question itself was puzzling. Why wouldn't you want to know everything? But Bill's exceptional intelligence was a double-edged sword. From an early age, his mind seemed to operate at a different speed than those around him. He'd grasp concepts quickly, sometimes impatiently, and then want to move on to the next challenge. This made him restless in structured environments like elementary school. Teachers found Bill both brilliant and difficult. He'd finish assignments quickly and then become bored, sometimes disruptive. He asked questions that went beyond the curriculum, challenged explanations that seemed incomplete, and generally didn't fit the mold of a typical student. He wasn't being deliberately troublesome, his mind simply demanded more stimulation than standard lessons provided. Socially, young Bill faced challenges. He was awkward with peers, often preferring his own company or the company of books to playing with other children. He could be blunt, even abrasive, when others couldn't keep up with his thinking. His intensity, which would later become his greatest business asset, often made him seem odd or difficult to those who encountered him as a child. His parents watched these dynamics with a mixture of pride and concern. They recognized their son's exceptional abilities, but they also worried about his social development and emotional well-being. How do you raise a child who is clearly gifted without letting that giftedness become isolating or burdensome? One aspect of Gates' family life profoundly shaped young Bill's character: competition. The Gates family loved games, and they played to win. Board games, card games, word games, the family engaged in all of them with fierce enthusiasm. But these weren't friendly, casual diversions. They were battles. Bill's competitive nature was forged in these family game sessions. He hated losing. When he did lose, he'd analyze what went wrong, develop new strategies, and come back determined to win the next time. His mother Mary later said that Bill was simply born to compete. It wasn't just about winning games, it was about mastering any challenge put before him. This competitive drive extended to everything Bill attempted. If there was a skill to be learned, he wanted to be the best at it. If there was a puzzle to be solved, he wouldn't rest until he had the answer. His parents encouraged this drive while trying to channel it productively, teaching him that competition should push you to be better, not just to beat others. Bill would argue about rules, negotiate for advantages, and push every boundary. He had a sharp mind and wasn't afraid to use it, even against his own parents. This made him exhausting to deal with at times, but his parents also recognized that this relentless drive, properly directed, could lead to extraordinary achievement. The competitive atmosphere of the Gates household wasn't cruel or destructive. Bill's parents loved their children deeply and created a home that was fundamentally supportive. But they also believed in high standards, in intellectual rigor, and in teaching their children to strive for excellence in whatever they pursued. As Bill moved through elementary school, his parents grappled with a difficult question: what kind of educational environment would best serve their exceptional son? The public schools were adequate for most children, but Bill clearly needed something more. He needed intellectual challenge, but he also needed structure and discipline. He needed to be around other bright students, but he also needed to develop social skills and learn to work with others. The challenges were becoming more pronounced. Bill was increasingly bored in class, occasionally getting into trouble for his restlessness. His teachers recognized his abilities but weren't always sure how to handle a student who was simultaneously gifted and difficult. His parents could see that their son needed a change, an environment that could engage his formidable intellect while also helping him develop the social and emotional skills he would need in life. The question wasn't just about education, it was about shaping the trajectory of their son's life. They knew Bill had extraordinary potential, but they also knew that potential, without the right opportunities and guidance, could be wasted or misdirected. Young Bill Gates, with his voracious reading, his competitive fire, his social awkwardness, and his restless intelligence, was poised on the edge of adolescence. The foundations had been laid: the intellectual curiosity, the drive to excel, the analytical mind, the willingness to challenge authority and convention. All the raw materials were there. His childhood in Seattle had shaped him, challenged him, and prepared him. They chose to send him to the place where his destiny would finally find its spark: the elite, academically rigorous halls of the Lakeside School. Chapter 2, The Lakeside School Years. In the fall of 1967, 12-year-old Bill Gates walked through the gates of the Lakeside School for the first time. The tuition was a real financial stretch for his parents, but they believed their brilliant, restless son needed an environment that could finally match his abilities. Lakeside, one of the finest preparatory schools in the Pacific Northwest, was exclusive and academically rigorous. Its motto focused on intellectual curiosity and pushing students to reach their full potential. For Bill, arriving in 7th grade was transformative. Gone were the bored, frustrating days of public school. Here, classes moved faster, demanded more, and expected excellence. More importantly, Bill was suddenly surrounded by other intensely smart, motivated kids. For the first time, his intensity wasn't a liability. He found peers who could challenge him and keep up. He wasn't the most popular kid, but he had finally found his tribe. Academically, he soared. Math came easily, he loved the elegant precision and certainty of the correct answer. Science fascinated him, too. The spark, 1968. Then, in 1968, the ground shifted. The Lakeside School Mothers Club had an unexpected windfall from a rummage sale. They decided to do something radical: purchase access to a computer. In an era dominated by massive mainframes, machines that filled entire rooms, Lakeside secured time on a time-sharing system and installed a clunky teletype terminal in a small room. Most students lost interest quickly. But for 13-year-old Bill Gates, walking into that room and seeing that machine was a moment of absolute revelation. Here was something that combined logic, mathematics, and creativity perfectly. The computer operated on the programming language BASIC. If you wrote your code correctly, the computer executed it perfectly, without judgment. For Bill, this was intoxicating. The computer was completely logical, endlessly complex, and limited only by his own imagination and skill. Bill began spending every available moment at that terminal. He skipped lunch, skipped gym, and stayed after school until someone physically made him leave. His other classes, even his social life, faded away. He taught himself programming through trial and error, reading sparse documentation, and pure, relentless experimentation. He had found his obsession. A formidable partnership. In that tiny computer room, Bill met someone who shared his passion completely: Paul Allen. Paul was 2 years older, a sophomore, tall, thoughtful, and almost the opposite of Bill's intense, sometimes abrasive energy. Yet, they clicked immediately. They started spending hours together, teaching each other what they learned, pushing the boundaries of the machine. Their skills were perfectly complementary. Paul had a gift for seeing the big picture, where technology was heading and what was possible in the future. Bill, meanwhile, was the relentless, competitive problem solver. He would dive deep into the code, optimizing it, making it faster, and working through complex logic with fierce determination. Together, they were formidable. But their intense usage quickly burned through the school's budget. The terminal went dark. Devastated but resourceful, they found their next opportunity at a local company called Computer Center Corporation, or C-Cubed. The company needed people to test and debug its new mainframe system in exchange for free computer time. Bill and Paul jumped at the opportunity. They spent countless hours at C-Cubed, often working late into the night. They were supposed to be finding bugs, but they were also mastering the system, gaining hands-on experience most adults in the field didn't possess. This cycle of finding access, using it intensely, occasionally getting banned, and returning, built their foundation. The first venture, Trafo Data. Along with a few other classmates who shared their obsession, Bill and Paul formalized their efforts into the Lakeside Programmers Group. They weren't just hobbyists, they saw business potential. Their first real venture came from a local need. The city of Seattle was analyzing traffic patterns using data recorded on punch cards, a tedious and time-consuming process. Bill and Paul saw a clear opportunity for automation. They formed a small venture they ambitiously named Trafodata. They built a small computer using an Intel processor and wrote software to read the punch cards and generate reports. The technology worked, and they made a modest profit, reportedly around $20,000 total. More important than the money, Trafodata proved a fundamental idea: their programming skills had tangible value in the marketplace. People would pay for software solutions to real-world problems. What had started as a childhood obsession could, in fact, become a career. Beyond the code. Throughout high school, despite his deep focus on computers, Bill maintained excellent grades. He scored a perfect 1600 on his SAT and excelled across his subjects. He also indulged his competitive nature by playing poker, honing his ability to read opponents and calculate odds, skills that would serve him well in business. He also read extensively, particularly biographies, seeking to understand how others built great achievements. By the time Bill graduated from Lakeside in 1973, he had accumulated thousands of hours of professional-level programming experience and a successful, if small, business venture. He had discovered his life's purpose and found his indispensable partner in Paul Allen. Lakeside School had provided the crucial spark. Now, the young man who knew exactly what he wanted, to be at the center of the computer revolution and to win, was ready for the next step. As Bill prepared to leave Seattle for Harvard University in the fall of 1973, he didn't know it yet, but his time there would be brief. The vision he and Paul shared, the opportunities they could sense on the horizon, would prove too powerful to resist. Chapter 3: Harvard and the Birth of Microsoft. In the fall of 1973, 18-year-old Bill Gates arrived at Harvard University in Cambridge, Massachusetts. For most students, this was the culmination of years of ambition and the gateway to a secure, successful future. Bill's parents were proud. Their son, with his exceptional academic record, had been accepted to one of the most prestigious institutions in the world. Bill himself was excited by the intellectual challenges and the access to cutting-edge resources. But he was also leaving behind something crucial: his partnership with Paul Allen and the clear sense of purpose he had found in programming. Bill was nominally enrolled as a pre-law student, a nod to his father's profession, but he had no real intention of becoming an attorney. Instead, he took mostly mathematics and computer science courses, immediately gravitating toward the labs. True to form, he would work through the night, subsisting on pizza and Coca-Cola, often sleeping through his morning lectures. His lifestyle at Harvard wasn't fundamentally different from his intense, focused existence at Lakeside, it just had a more prestigious setting. He struggled with Harvard's structure. He had spent years teaching himself, pursuing knowledge on his own terms, working on real projects with tangible applications. Now, being confined to an academic curriculum working toward credentials felt increasingly irrelevant to his singular goal. Meeting Steve Ballmer. It was here that he met Steve Ballmer, a man who would become one of the most important relationships of his professional life. Steve was Bill's opposite: loud, physically imposing, extroverted, and socially magnetic. Where Bill was awkward and intense, Steve was gregarious and brimming with enthusiasm. On paper, they were an unlikely pair, yet they clicked immediately. Steve had a sharp mind for business and strategy, appreciating Bill's technical genius, and Bill valued Steve's energy and business sense. The friendship, forged in the dorms, laid the foundation for Microsoft's future management structure. Meanwhile, Paul Allen had graduated and taken a job at Honeywell in Boston, ensuring he could remain close to Bill. Paul visited Harvard regularly, and they spent countless hours in the labs, discussing new technologies, reading every computer trade magazine they could find, and nurturing their shared vision, that computers were about to become small, accessible, and eventually, ubiquitous. The Altair moment. Then, in January 1975, everything changed. Paul Allen was walking through Harvard Square when he saw the new issue of Popular Electronics magazine. The cover featured a small, boxy device with switches and lights. The headline: Project Breakthrough. World's first mini-computer kit. Altair 8800. Paul grabbed the magazine and raced to Bill's dorm. They both instantly understood the significance. This was the commercial moment they had been anticipating. The Altair 8800, sold by a tiny company called MITS in Albuquerque, New Mexico, was primitive. It cost less than $400 as a kit, used the new Intel 8080 microprocessor, and was programmed by manually flipping switches. But none of that mattered. What mattered was that this was a real computer that individuals could finally own. And it desperately needed software to make it useful. Bill and Paul made an audacious decision. Someone was going to write a programming language, a basic interpreter, that would make the Altair easy to use. That someone was going to be them. They immediately called Ed Roberts, the founder of MITS, and told him they had a fully functional basic interpreter ready for the Altair. This was a bluff. They had nothing, but they were confident they could create it. Roberts was intrigued but skeptical, having heard similar claims before. He agreed to look at whatever they could produce. The impossible deadline. Bill and Paul now had about 8 weeks to create a working version of BASIC for a machine they had never touched, using a microprocessor they had never programmed. It was an impossible deadline for an impossible task. Bill essentially dropped out of sight at Harvard. He and Paul worked obsessively. To write and test the code without the physical machine, they first had to create an ingenious emulator, a program that would make the Harvard computer simulate the Altair. It was a technical feat in itself, practically essential to the project's success. The work was relentless. BASIC had to be written to fit in the Altair's minuscule 4 kilobytes of memory. Every single byte counted. Bill attacked the challenge with all his competitive drive, optimizing and refining the code until it was as lean and efficient as possible. He would program for 36 hours straight, fueled only by coffee and adrenaline, barely sleeping or eating. Finally, in early March, they had something that might work. Paul flew to Albuquerque carrying a paper tape with their basic interpreter. On the flight, he realized one critical detail was missing: the initial program needed to load the interpreter. He frantically wrote the necessary code, the bootstrap loader, finishing it just as the plane landed. The birth of an industry. At MITS headquarters, Paul nervously fed the paper tape into the Altair. The machine began loading the program. If they had made any mistake in their emulation, the whole thing would fail spectacularly. Then came the test. Paul typed a simple command, followed by a calculation. The Altair responded correctly. He ran a small program. It executed perfectly. Against all odds, the basic interpreter, written entirely remotely and blind, worked flawlessly on the first try. Roberts was floored. Roberts wanted to license their BASIC immediately. This was the moment Bill and Paul had been working toward. But it forced Bill to make the agonizing decision: Harvard or the revolution? Bill agonized over the choice between the security and prestige of Harvard and the high-risk, high-reward opportunity in Albuquerque. Paul urged him to take the leap, arguing that if they were going to build software for the emerging personal computer industry, they needed to be all in, moving fast to seize the initiative. Bill made his decision. He would leave Harvard. He would pursue this revolution. In the spring of 1975, Bill Gates and Paul Allen moved to Albuquerque. On April 4, 1975, they officially founded their company. They settled on the name, Microsoft, later dropping the hyphen. It was simple, direct, and descriptive: software for microcomputers. Bill was 19, Paul was 22. They had no office, no corporate structure, and limited funds. What they had was a working product, a powerful partnership, and the conviction that they were about to change the world. They were at the epicenter of the emerging personal computer revolution, and nothing, not even Harvard, could stand in the way of building the company that would define the next technological era. Chapter 4: Building the Empire. The early years of Microsoft in Albuquerque were far from glamorous. Bill and Paul worked out of a cramped office, surrounded by young programmers. Money was constantly tight. They lived on pizza, worked impossible hours, and poured everything they had into the company. The relationship with MITS, the maker of the Altair, was complicated. Bill was providing the essential software, but he was dependent on MITS for distribution and payments. Disagreements over royalties and marketing were frequent. Despite his youth, Bill proved to be a fierce negotiator, refusing to compromise when Microsoft's interests were threatened. But to survive, Microsoft couldn't be tied exclusively to the Altair. New microcomputers were constantly emerging, each with different architectures. Bill and his small team worked relentlessly to port BASIC to different platforms, the Apple II, the Commodore PET, the Radio Shack TRS-80. This strategy of being platform agnostic, of working with any hardware manufacturer, would become the cornerstone of Microsoft's success. The return home. In 1979, Microsoft made the critical move back to Seattle. They set up offices in Bellevue, a suburb across Lake Washington. For Bill, this was coming home. It allowed him to see his family and, crucially, to recruit top talent from the University of Washington and the local tech industry. The company was growing rapidly. Bill was learning to be a businessman, negotiating contracts, managing people, and making strategic decisions. His management style was intense and demanding. He expected everyone to share his obsession with winning and the quality of the code. The IBM masterstroke. Then, in the summer of 1980, something extraordinary happened. IBM came calling. IBM, the undisputed titan of the computing industry, had missed the emerging personal computer market. Now, desperate to compete with companies like Apple, they decided to launch their own PC. In an unprecedented move, IBM chose to use off-the-shelf components and licensed software from outside vendors to speed up development. IBM needed an operating system for their PC, and they approached Bill Gates and Microsoft. There was just one problem: Microsoft didn't have an operating system to sell them. Classic Bill Gates, he told IBM yes, committed to the deal, and then raced to figure out how to deliver. Bill quickly learned about a company called Seattle Computer Products that had developed an operating system called QDOS, the Quick and Dirty Operating System. In one of the most consequential deals in technology history, Bill bought QDOS for $50,000. He adapted it for the IBM PC, renamed it PC-DOS, and licensed it to IBM. Here was the critical masterstroke: Bill Gates negotiated to retain the rights to license the operating system to other companies. IBM, focused on hardware dominance and confident they would control the PC market, agreed. They fundamentally underestimated the value of software. They were wrong. The IBM PC launched in August 1981 and was an immediate success. IBM's reputation made it the standard for business computing almost overnight. Every IBM PC sold came with Microsoft's operating system. More importantly, as other manufacturers began building cheaper, more powerful IBM-compatible clones, they all needed an operating system too. Microsoft licensed them MS-DOS. As the PC market exploded, Microsoft's MS-DOS became the standard, installed on the vast majority of personal computers worldwide. Bill had positioned Microsoft at the center of the revolution. The GUI wars begin. But Bill was never content. He was already looking ahead, recognizing the biggest looming threat: the graphical user interface, or GUI. Traditional MS-DOS required users to type complicated commands. Meanwhile, Apple was developing something intuitive: a GUI that used a mouse to point and click on visual elements, icons and windows. When Apple launched the groundbreaking Macintosh in 1984, Bill understood immediately that the command line interface was becoming obsolete. Microsoft had to respond. Bill announced they were developing Windows, a graphical operating system that would run on IBM-compatible PCs. The development was far harder than anticipated. When Windows 1.0 finally shipped in 1985, it was slow, buggy, and underwhelming. Critics panned it, and the Macintosh's interface made Windows look primitive. This period sparked a fierce rivalry with Apple, who sued Microsoft, claiming they had copied the Mac's look and feel after developing early applications for it. Though the lawsuit would drag on for years, Microsoft ultimately prevailed. Bill didn't give up. He persisted, knowing Windows was the future, even as MS-DOS remained the profitable present. Culture and capital. While Windows struggled, Microsoft thrived in other areas, developing powerful application software like Microsoft Word and Microsoft Excel. Bill understood that they needed to be in every layer of software, not just the operating system. The culture Bill established was intense, competitive, and demanding. Meetings were often confrontational, with Bill notorious for challenging anyone who couldn't defend their ideas with rigorous logic. "That's the stupidest thing I've ever heard," became an infamous Bill Gates phrase in meetings. This high-pressure environment attracted brilliant people who thrived on challenge and competition, driving the company to exponential growth. On March 13, 1986, Microsoft went public. The initial public offering, IPO, priced shares at $21 each, valuing the company at over $520 million. Bill Gates, who owned 45% of the shares, instantly became one of the wealthiest self-made millionaires in history. A year later, in 1987, at just 31 years old, Bill Gates became a billionaire. He was the youngest self-made billionaire at that time. For Bill, the wealth was secondary. What mattered was winning, building Microsoft into the dominant force in software, and proving his vision of a personal computer on every desk was inevitable. By the late 1980s, the empire was built, and Bill Gates was just getting started. The battles that would truly define his legacy, the triumph of Windows, the antitrust scrutiny, and the digital revolution itself, were just beginning. Chapter 5: Domination and Controversy. By the early 1990s, Microsoft had become a phenomenon. Their applications, Word, Excel, PowerPoint, were the standard tools of business. Microsoft was everywhere, and Bill Gates was becoming one of the most recognizable figures in technology. But with absolute dominance came fierce scrutiny, and with scrutiny, came criticism. Microsoft's business tactics had always been aggressive, but as the company grew more powerful, those tactics attracted increasing controversy. Competitors complained that Microsoft used its control of the operating system to unfairly benefit its own applications. They alleged that Microsoft would alter Windows in ways that made competing software run poorly or not at all. The phrase, embrace, extend, extinguish, became infamous. The idea was that Microsoft would embrace existing standards, extend them with proprietary features that only worked well on Windows, and ultimately extinguish the competition. Whether deliberately stated or not, the perception stuck, defining Microsoft's reputation as a corporate bully. Bill Gates's approach to competition was uncompromising. He believed in winning, completely and decisively. This was his obsession, and he pursued it with a focus that could seem ruthless to those in Microsoft's path. The company culture Bill created valued intelligence above all else. Meetings were notoriously intense, with Bill himself challenging presenters relentlessly, demanding better data, and refusing to accept incomplete thinking. His infamous phrase, "That's the stupidest thing I've ever heard," could make or break careers. This created a high-pressure environment that attracted brilliant, ambitious people who thrived on challenge, but it also fostered arrogance and a reputation for being toxic. The Windows 95 phenomenon. Then came Windows 95, and everything changed. Microsoft had been working on Windows for over a decade, but Windows 95 was different. This was the company's attempt to create a truly modern, user-friendly operating system that maintained compatibility with the massive existing software base. The development was a massive, multi-year undertaking, with Bill Gates deeply involved in every feature decision. The launch of Windows 95 in August 1995 was a masterclass in marketing, unlike anything the industry had ever seen. Microsoft spent hundreds of millions of dollars, licensing the Rolling Stones' "Start Me Up" to highlight the iconic new Start button. The Empire State Building was lit up in Windows colors. It worked. Windows 95 became a cultural phenomenon. People lined up at midnight to buy copies. Within 4 days, Microsoft sold 1 million copies. Within a year, they had sold 40 million. Windows 95 transformed Microsoft from a successful tech company into a household name and secured its dominance in the operating system market. Bill Gates was everywhere, appearing on talk shows and writing his book, The Road Ahead. He became not just a businessman, but a tech guru whose opinions on the future carried enormous weight. The browser wars and antitrust. But just as Windows 95 secured its dominance, a new threat emerged: the Internet. Microsoft, incredibly, had almost missed this revolution. Bill Gates had been so focused on the operating system that he hadn't fully grasped the Internet's existential threat. The key to the web was the browser, and the dominant one in the mid-90s was Netscape Navigator. If applications moved online, Microsoft's operating system could become irrelevant. But once he understood, he pivoted the entire company with whiplash speed. Microsoft declared war on Netscape. They developed their own browser, Internet Explorer, and did something highly controversial: they bundled it with Windows for free. Microsoft then pressured computer manufacturers and Internet service providers to make IE the default, using its operating system monopoly as the ultimate leverage. The strategy worked brilliantly. Internet Explorer's market share soared, while Netscape's plummeted. Microsoft had won the browser wars, but the victory came with consequences. Netscape and others filed complaints, alleging that Microsoft was engaging in anti-competitive practices. In May 1998, the United States Department of Justice, along with 20 states, filed an antitrust lawsuit against Microsoft. The charge: that Microsoft had abused its monopoly power to stifle competition. The trial, which began in October 1998, became a media sensation. Bill Gates himself was deposed, and the videotapes of his testimony became infamous. Bill appeared evasive, argumentative, and quibbled over definitions, making him seem dishonest. His performance was widely seen as a disaster for Microsoft's public image. The trial revealed internal emails that showed the company discussing ways to cut off the air supply to competitors. Judge Thomas Penfield Jackson was not sympathetic. In November 1999, he issued devastating findings, concluding that Microsoft held monopoly power and maintained it through anti-competitive conduct. In April 2000, Judge Jackson ruled that Microsoft had violated antitrust law and, in June, issued a shocking remedy. He ordered Microsoft to be broken up into 2 separate companies. The breakup order was a nuclear option, unprecedented and catastrophic for the company Bill had poured his life into. Legacy and transformation. Microsoft appealed the decision. In 2001, an appeals court overturned the breakup order, though it agreed Microsoft had violated antitrust law. Ultimately, Microsoft negotiated a settlement with the Department of Justice that imposed restrictions on their business practices but preserved the company structure. Microsoft had survived, but its reputation was battered. Bill Gates personally was seen by many not as an innovative entrepreneur, but as a ruthless monopolist. Critics argued Microsoft stifled innovation by leveraging its dominance rather than competing fairly. The trial consumed enormous time and resources, forcing the company to become more cautious. Public perception of Bill Gates shifted dramatically. Once the celebrated boy genius, he was now often portrayed as a greedy monopolist who cared only about power. The antitrust trial marked a turning point. The experience was bruising, professionally and personally. Coupled with his marriage to Melinda French in 1994 and the start of their family, the intense scrutiny prompted Bill to think about his legacy. Did he want to be remembered only for building Microsoft and dominating the market, or for something more? As the 20th century ended, Bill Gates stood at a crossroads. Exhausted and facing criticism, he realized there might be more meaningful ways to spend his time and wealth than fighting competitors and regulators. The aggressive skills that had built the empire were about to be redirected. The seeds of a transformation from ruthless businessman to global philanthropist were being planted. Chapter 6, Beyond the Billionaire. Behind the headlines about Microsoft's dominance and the antitrust battles, Bill Gates was living a life that was, in many ways, remarkably private. But understanding the man behind the company requires understanding his relationships, his family, and the personal journey that ran parallel to his professional achievements. Bill Gates met Melinda French in 1987 at a Microsoft company event. A brilliant product manager with degrees in computer science and economics, Melinda was not intimidated by Bill's reputation or intensity. Their relationship developed slowly. Bill was consumed by Microsoft. Characteristically, he approached the decision of marriage analytically, famously creating a list of pros and cons, weighing love with the same logical rigor he applied to business problems. Whatever his analytical process, Bill eventually concluded that marrying Melinda was the right decision. On January 1, 1994, Bill and Melinda were married in Hawaii in a private ceremony, a stark contrast to his public professional life. To ensure privacy, Microsoft reportedly paid to book every helicopter on the island. Family and fatherhood. Marriage did not immediately slow Bill's obsessive work pace, but Melinda began to push him to think beyond business, about family, and about what to do with their growing wealth. Their first child, Jennifer Catherine Gates, arrived in 1996. Becoming a father was transformative. Suddenly, there was someone in his life who didn't care about Microsoft or market share. Melinda had to insist that being a father required time, attention, and emotional availability, forcing Bill to struggle with a work-life balance that his nature resisted. Their second child, Rory John Gates, was born in 1999, right as the antitrust trial was at its peak. Bill was battling an existential threat to his company while trying to be present for his growing family. Their third child, Phoebe Adele Gates, was born in 2002, by which time Bill was starting to step back from day-to-day operations at Microsoft. Despite their enormous wealth, Bill and Melinda were intentional about how they raised their children. They limited screen time. They fostered intellectual curiosity, much like Bill's parents did. They enforced clear expectations about responsibility and the value of work. They consciously tried to shield them from the full magnitude of their family's wealth. Meanwhile, their enormous estate on Lake Washington in Medina, built over 7 years and costing over $60 million, became a technological marvel, and a public symbol of Bill's vast success and the potential disconnect between the Gates family and ordinary lives. The Buffett influence. Beyond the mansion, a crucial relationship kept Bill grounded, his deep friendship with Warren Buffett. Introduced in 1991, Bill and Warren connected instantly, sharing a similar analytical, long-term approach to value. Their friendship became a mentorship. Buffett, who had committed to giving away the vast majority of his fortune, believed that dynastic wealth was harmful, robbing children of purpose. These ideas profoundly influenced Bill and Melinda as they contemplated their own wealth. Melinda also played a crucial role in shaping the family's values. Coming from a middle-class background, she emphasized service, compassion, and the importance of using their resources to help others. As their philanthropic work expanded, family trips to developing countries exposed their children to poverty and inequality, linking their upbringing directly to their future responsibilities. The personal reckoning. For years, the Gates marriage appeared solid, a united front navigating fame and fortune. They were partners in philanthropy and parents to 3 children. But Bill's intensity, which was an asset in business, remained a liability in personal relationships. He could be impatient and demanding. In May 2021, Bill and Melinda shocked the world with an announcement: after 27 years of marriage, they were divorcing. The news generated enormous media attention. Details emerged gradually: reports of Bill's demanding work style, an admitted workplace relationship that had violated Microsoft policy years earlier, and concerning connections to Jeffrey Epstein that Melinda reportedly found troubling. The divorce was finalized in August 2021, and while the settlement involved billions in assets, Bill and Melinda made a crucial commitment: they would continue to work together on the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, recognizing that their mission was too important to derail. In the aftermath, questions about Bill's personal conduct and judgment became prominent. For someone working to transition his reputation from ruthless businessman to benevolent philanthropist, the revelations about infidelity and poor judgment were damaging. Bill issued apologies, acknowledging mistakes and expressing regret for the impact on his family. The divorce forced a reckoning. The man who had spent decades solving complex technical and strategic problems had to face personal failures that couldn't be fixed with logic alone. It was a stark reminder that some things can't be controlled and that relationships require more than just strategic thinking. Bill Gates's personal life, from his analytical approach to marriage to his struggle with fatherhood and the ultimate failure of his marriage, reveals the complex human being behind the icon. He is a man capable of extraordinary vision and ordinary failings. As he moved into his late 60s, divorced but still committed to global philanthropy, Bill faced questions about legacy and meaning that his younger self, obsessed with dominating the software industry, could never have imagined. The second half of his life would be defined by the redirection of his formidable intensity towards solving global problems, a transformation rooted in the personal and familial journeys of this chapter. Chapter 7: A New Mission. The transformation of Bill Gates from ruthless tech mogul to global philanthropist didn't happen overnight. It was a gradual evolution, influenced by key people, by personal experiences that opened his eyes to suffering beyond his privileged world, and by a growing sense that building Microsoft, while significant, wasn't enough to define a meaningful life. Bill's early relationship with philanthropy was limited and somewhat reluctant. Throughout the 1980s and early 90s, as his wealth grew to astronomical levels, he gave relatively little away. He was intensely focused on Microsoft. When pressed by critics about his lack of charitable giving, Bill would dismissively say he was too busy winning the software war, promising to focus on philanthropy later. The catalysts: Mary, Melinda, and the world. The first major influence was his mother, Mary Gates. She spent her life deeply involved in civic institutions and service. She gently but persistently pushed Bill to think about responsibility and what he owed to the broader community. Her influence became tragically urgent when she passed away from breast cancer in June 1994. Her death forced Bill to immediately confront questions of legacy and purpose. What would his mother have wanted him to do with his extraordinary success? The second major influence was his wife, Melinda Gates. She consistently pushed him to think beyond business. Growing up in a middle-class family where service was central, Melinda saw wealth as carrying responsibility, not just privilege. She steered Bill toward reading about global health challenges and encouraged him to see suffering firsthand. A pivotal experience was an early trip to Africa. Bill and Melinda saw poverty and disease on a scale that shocked them, people dying from preventable illnesses, communities without access to basic health care or clean water. These weren't statistics, they were human beings suffering needlessly right in front of them. Bill approached these problems analytically. He read extensively about global health and disease interventions. He was struck by the extraordinary humanitarian return on investment. Relatively modest amounts of money, spent intelligently on proven interventions like vaccines and mosquito nets, could save millions of lives. This was Bill's revelation: applying his analytical mind and vast resources to global health could save lives, offering an extraordinary leverage for good that he hadn't fully appreciated. The third key influence was his friend, Warren Buffett. The two shared countless conversations about the responsibilities of extreme wealth. Buffett, who believed that dynastic wealth was harmful, challenged Bill to move faster and deploy his wealth while he was alive, rather than waiting. The foundation and catalytic philanthropy. In the immediate aftermath of his mother's death, Bill and Melinda established their first foundation in 1994. By 2000, they merged their efforts into the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. With an initial endowment of billions, it instantly became one of the largest private foundations in the world, dedicated to reducing inequity and helping all people lead healthy, productive lives. Bill brought the same intensity and analytical rigor he had perfected at Microsoft to his new endeavor. The foundation would not simply write checks, it would identify problems where evidence suggested they could have a significant impact, develop strategies based on data and research, measure results rigorously, and adjust based on what worked. This approach came to be known as catalytic philanthropy. It focused on using foundation money strategically to achieve impact beyond what the foundation could accomplish alone. For instance, the foundation would fund research that led to a breakthrough in a malaria treatment, and then use that data to catalyze much larger funding commitments from governments and pharmaceutical partnerships to scale the solution worldwide. The goal was leverage and lasting change, not just charity. The foundation focused initially on global health, specifically diseases that killed millions in poor countries but received little research funding because the victims couldn't pay. Malaria, tuberculosis, and HIV/AIDS became priority areas. Bill became personally convinced that immunization was one of the most cost-effective ways to save lives, leading to massive investments in organizations like Gavi, the Global Vaccine Alliance. The final pivot from Microsoft. Even as the foundation grew, Bill remained the chief software architect at Microsoft. Philanthropy was becoming critically important, but Microsoft was still his primary focus. However, the strain of the antitrust trial and its aftermath, combined with the pressures of family life, forced a reckoning. He was in his mid-40s, incredibly wealthy, and facing questions about what he wanted the rest of his life to be about. The bruising experience of the trial, where his pursuit of business dominance invited government intervention and damaged his reputation, solidified his decision to shift. In 2006, Bill announced he would transition away from day-to-day responsibilities at Microsoft. It was a momentous decision, walking away from the company he had built for 31 years. For someone as controlling as Bill, letting go was immensely difficult, both professionally and psychologically. By 2008, the transition was complete. At 52 years old, Bill Gates was officially full-time at the foundation, beginning the second major phase of his career. The foundation expanded its scope and ambition, tackling education reform in the United States, agricultural development in Africa, and eventually, climate change. Bill's approach remained consistent. He believed in innovation, in measurement and accountability, and in using technology to find new solutions to old problems. The Giving Pledge and Scrutiny. The resources available to the foundation exploded in 2006 when Warren Buffett pledged to give away the vast majority of his fortune, over $30 billion at the time, with most of it directed to the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. This was the largest charitable gift in history, a profound statement of trust that made the Gates Foundation an unparalleled force in global development. Inspired by this scale, Bill, Melinda, and Warren created the Giving Pledge in 2010. The simple but radical idea was to convince the world's wealthiest individuals to publicly commit to giving away the majority of their wealth. It was a moral commitment that aimed to change the culture around extreme wealth, establishing a norm that with great wealth came a great responsibility to help others. The response was strong, with hundreds of billionaires eventually signing on. Bill became the most visible advocate for this new norm. He stated publicly that leaving his children billions of dollars would be harmful, confirming that the vast majority of his fortune, over 99%, would go to the foundation. This approach was not without its critics. Some argued that billionaire philanthropy, no matter how well-intentioned, was fundamentally problematic. They questioned why unelected billionaires should have so much influence over global priorities, arguing that relying on the charitable impulses of the rich was less democratic than higher taxes and public investment. Bill engaged with these criticisms seriously. He acknowledged that governments should play the primary role, and that philanthropy was merely a supplement. However, he argued that private philanthropy could move faster, take risks on unproven approaches, and fund research that governments often couldn't or wouldn't. His concept of catalytic philanthropy was designed precisely to maximize this advantage. The transformation from Microsoft CEO to full-time philanthropist was complete. The man obsessed with putting a computer on every desk was now obsessed with eradicating polio, improving global education, and solving climate change. The competitive drive that built Microsoft was entirely redirected toward social problems. The foundation bearing his and Melinda's names became the most powerful force in global health and development, shaping priorities and funding interventions that saved millions of lives. The architect of the digital revolution had become an architect of a systematic, data-driven approach to solving humanity's greatest challenges. The new mission, rooted in his mother's influence, driven by his partnership with Melinda, and informed by his unique intellectual intensity, would define the rest of his life. Chapter 8: Changing the World. Once Bill Gates committed fully to philanthropy in 2008, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation became one of the most powerful forces for change in global health and development. With an endowment exceeding $50 billion, the foundation had resources that rivaled some national governments. But more than just money, it brought Bill's analytical approach, his belief in innovation, and his relentless focus on measurable results. Bill was convinced that diseases killing millions in poor countries represented a solvable problem. People were dying not because solutions didn't exist, but because they couldn't afford or access existing tools. The Global Health Mission. One of the Foundation's most ambitious goals has been the eradication of polio. By the late 1990s, polio, a devastating disease that causes paralysis, remained endemic in several nations, primarily Afghanistan, Pakistan, and Nigeria, which was later removed from the list. The foundation partnered with organizations like the WHO and UNICEF in the Global Polio Eradication Initiative, funding vaccination campaigns and working to overcome massive obstacles, political instability, misinformation, and logistical challenges, to reach every child. The progress has been remarkable. The disease that once paralyzed hundreds of thousands now affects only dozens, remaining endemic in only 2 countries. Bill became the public face of the campaign, arguing passionately that humanity was on the verge of eliminating only the second disease in history, after smallpox. Malaria became another major focus. The foundation invested heavily in multiple approaches, including funding research into new drugs and treatments, distributing insecticide-treated bed nets, and investing in vaccine development. This work led to the World Health Organization's endorsement of the first malaria vaccine for widespread use in 2021, a new tool against a disease that kills hundreds of thousands annually, primarily children in sub-Saharan Africa. The foundation also tackled HIV and AIDS in Africa, transforming the disease from an almost certain death sentence into a manageable chronic condition for millions by funding access to antiretroviral drugs and prevention methods. The pandemic and the target. Then came COVID-19, and the foundation faced its greatest test. Drawing on years of warning the world was unprepared for a major pandemic, the foundation moved quickly in early 2020. They committed hundreds of millions of dollars to funding vaccine research and development and supported efforts to ensure that vaccines would be available globally, particularly in poor countries. Bill himself became one of the most visible voices, providing clear analysis of the crisis. However, this visibility also made him a target. Conspiracy theories flourished online, baselessly claiming Bill had somehow created or profited from the pandemic. Bill found himself in a surreal and frustrating position, trying to fund life-saving work while being painted as the villain. Despite the noise, the foundation's support for global access to the quickly developed vaccines had a measurable, life-saving impact. Beyond health, the foundation focused on other key areas. Education reform. They invested billions in the U.S., supporting initiatives like the Common Core state standards. However, these efforts proved complex, and Bill eventually acknowledged that certain initiatives, like heavily promoting smaller schools, hadn't produced the desired outcomes. This willingness to admit failure and change course, based on data, became a hallmark of the foundation's methodology. Agricultural development in Africa. Recognizing that most people in extreme poverty were subsistence farmers, the foundation funded research into drought-resistant, high-yield crop varieties to increase income, improve nutrition, and lift communities out of poverty in a sustainable way. Climate change. Starting in the 2010s, Bill became deeply engaged in the challenge of reducing emissions. He wrote the book, How to Avoid a Climate Disaster, 2021, arguing the world needs breakthrough innovation across all sectors. His personal investments and the foundation supported numerous clean energy technologies, from advanced nuclear reactors to carbon capture. Sanitation and water. The Reinvent the Toilet Challenge funded research into sanitation systems that could work without sewers, tackling unglamorous but critical problems that kill hundreds of thousands annually through waterborne disease. The question of influence. As the foundation's work expanded, its influence, and the criticism, grew. Supporters pointed to millions of lives saved, diseases controlled, and innovations funded. The impact was real and measurable. However, critics raised fundamental questions. Should one foundation, accountable only to its board, have so much influence over global priorities? Did the foundation's data-driven, technical approach, catalytic philanthropy, ignore deeper structural problems, such as land rights or political corruption? Did their partnership with pharmaceutical companies create conflicts of interest, particularly regarding intellectual property and drug prices? Bill defended the foundation's approach, arguing that it was a vital supplement to, not a replacement for, public investment, allowing for necessary risk-taking. He acknowledged mistakes, but maintained that their commitment to measurement and accountability was the best path to saving lives. By the early 2020s, the foundation had spent tens of billions of dollars. Polio was near elimination, diseases were controlled, and innovation was accelerated. Bill Gates, now in his late 60s, remained deeply engaged, the work having become his life's purpose. The intensity that built Microsoft, the analytical mind that dominated the software industry, and the competitive drive that couldn't tolerate losing, all of it was now directed toward diseases, poverty, and inequality. The mission had changed, but the man, in fundamental ways, remained the same, brilliant, driven, imperfect, and determined to win in the battle to change the world. Chapter 9: The Man and His Impact. To understand Bill Gates fully, you must understand how his mind works. Throughout his life, certain patterns of thinking have remained remarkably consistent, from that first encounter with a computer at age 13 to his current role as global philanthropist. Bill approaches problems analytically, breaking them down into component parts, understanding how systems work, and identifying leverage points where interventions can have an outsized impact. Whether optimizing code at Microsoft or strategizing about malaria prevention, the process is the same: gather data, analyze rigorously, test solutions, measure results, and iterate. His management style reflected this. At Microsoft, his intense review sessions and the infamous phrase, "That's the stupidest thing I've ever heard," pushed people to defend their ideas with evidence and logic. This style was brutal but effective, forcing people to elevate their game. However, this same intensity and singular focus created a tunnel vision that often failed to account for the human element, leading to burnout, relationship strain, and a culturally competitive environment. The contested legacy. Public perception of Bill Gates has undergone a dramatic, three-part evolution. The boy genius, 1980s. He was the brilliant young entrepreneur, the face of the personal computer revolution, changing the world through technology. The ruthless monopolist, 1990s. As Microsoft's dominance grew and the antitrust trial cemented his image, he became the villain, the empire builder crushing competitors and stifling innovation. The repentant philanthropist, 2000. Stepping back from Microsoft to focus on the foundation led to an image rehabilitation, with many seeing his second act as redemptive, saving millions of lives. However, the divorce and subsequent revelations about his personal conduct, including his poor judgment regarding people like Jeffrey Epstein, complicated this redemptive narrative, suggesting significant blind spots regarding power dynamics and personal accountability. During the COVID-19 pandemic, his visibility made him a lightning rod for conspiracy theories, revealing how his wealth and influence made him a target for global suspicion. So, who is Bill Gates? He is all of these things, simultaneously: brilliant and difficult, generous and controlling, visionary and myopic. The controversies that marked his career deserve examination. At Microsoft, the aggressive tactics that led to antitrust violations were real. The question remains how to weigh that damage against the genuine value Microsoft created, the jobs, the technology, and the democratization of computing. In his personal life, the admitted failings suggest that even extraordinary intelligence can coexist with significant human blind spots. The future focus. Bill's reading and think weeks, periods of intense, solitary intellectual focus, continue to drive his current priorities. He has become a prolific communicator through his books and his blog, Gates Notes, revealing an enduring belief in human progress and the power of innovation. Currently, his focus extends to the next great technological frontier, artificial intelligence. Bill sees AI as potentially the most important technological development of the coming decades, more transformative than the PC or the Internet. He is investing in how AI can accelerate solutions for global challenges while advocating for thoughtful regulation to mitigate risks like job displacement and the concentration of power. Climate change remains a massive focus. Bill argues the world needs to reach net zero emissions by 2050 through breakthrough technologies across all emitting sectors: electricity, transportation, manufacturing, and agriculture. He advocates for dramatically increased government R&D funding alongside his personal investments in cutting-edge technologies like next-generation nuclear reactors. The sum of the parts. Measuring Bill Gates's impact is complex because it is so multifaceted. Technology, his impact is undeniable. Microsoft made personal computers accessible and established industry standards that drove the digital revolution. Philanthropy, the impact is substantial. The Foundation's work on vaccines has saved millions of lives, and its catalytic approach has changed how philanthropy operates globally. His legacy is not a simple hero's journey or a cautionary tale, it's a story of extraordinary achievement and significant personal failure. He is someone with gifts and opportunities who achieved remarkable things while also making mistakes, saving lives while harming competitors, and building an empire only to try and use it for the good of humanity. Bill Gates is brilliant but not wise in all things. He is a consequential figure who has shaped technology, business, philanthropy, and global health for generations. The boy who fell in love with a teletype terminal became a man trying to bend the arc of history toward progress. The story of Bill Gates is still being written. The final chapters will depend on the continued work of his foundation and how future generations interpret the role of the 21st century tech billionaire. Ultimately, his most enduring legacy may be the demonstration of what's possible when immense intelligence, resources, and determination are directed toward humanity's most difficult problems. He is all in on ensuring that his final impact is one he can live with. Conclusion: the man and his legacy. We began this journey watching a 13-year-old boy, mesmerized by a teletype terminal at Lakeside School, discover an obsession that would consume his life. That boy, Bill Gates, couldn't have imagined where that obsession would lead, to building one of the most powerful companies in history, to becoming one of the wealthiest people ever to live, and to dedicating billions of dollars to solving humanity's greatest challenges. The journey from that computer room spans over 5 decades and encompasses transformations few people experience. Bill went from programmer to entrepreneur, to ruthless businessman, to global philanthropist. Each phase built on what came before, yet each represented a fundamental shift in purpose and priorities. The architect's phases. As an entrepreneur, Bill and Paul Allen didn't just start a company, they helped create an industry. They combined passion, intelligence, and relentless work to see possibilities and execute with almost superhuman focus. As a businessman, Microsoft's dominance came from brilliant strategy, superior execution, and, undeniably, aggressive tactics that sometimes crossed ethical and legal lines. The empire he built democratized personal computing, but the methods used generated legitimate criticism and lasting consequences. As a philanthropist, Bill redirected his formidable abilities toward problems that truly matter. The Foundation's work has saved millions of lives and funded crucial research, demonstrating what strategic, well-resourced philanthropy can accomplish. But it has also raised important questions about power, accountability, and the model of billionaire charity. The complexity of Bill Gates's legacy, his inability to be reduced to a simple hero or villain, is what makes his story so compelling and instructive. Lessons from a consequential life. We can draw several powerful lessons from Bill Gates's complicated journey. 1. Passion and focus are catalysts. Bill's singular obsession with computers drove everything he accomplished. When care is combined with relentless determination, remarkable results are achievable. 2. Intelligence requires action. Raw intelligence matters, but Bill's success came equally from his work ethic, strategic thinking, willingness to take risks, and ability to attract talented partners. What you do with your intelligence matters more. 3. Skills must evolve. The competitive intensity that made him a successful businessman had to be fundamentally adapted for philanthropy, where success is less clear-cut and where collaboration often supersedes competition. 4. Success doesn't guarantee wisdom. Bill achieved extraordinary professional success while making significant mistakes in his personal life and showing poor judgment in key relationships. Being smart about business doesn't make you smart about everything. 5. Transformation is possible. Bill could have easily retired, but he chose to start a new chapter, taking on challenges harder than building a software company. This willingness to keep growing is admirable regardless of one's opinion of his choices. 6. Impact is measured in totality. Bill's impact through Microsoft and his impact through the foundation are both undeniable. But complete legacies include the competitors crushed, the criticisms about concentrated power, and the personal failures. Impact is multifaceted. The architect's ongoing mission. As Bill Gates moves through his late 60s, his work continues. His mission remains clear. He wants to see polio finally eradicated, bringing the world to the end of a decades-long effort. He seeks breakthrough innovations in clean energy to make addressing climate change economically viable. He wants robust pandemic preparedness systems in place for the world's inevitable next disease outbreak. He aims to demonstrate that systematic, data-driven philanthropy can make a profound difference at scale. The title, The Architect of the Digital Revolution, is apt because he literally architected the software and the company that underpinned the age. But it's incomplete, as the digital revolution was messier than any one person's vision. Bill's role was crucial, but not singular. What's undeniable is that the world would be profoundly different without Bill Gates. His story is not a simple hero's journey, but a rich, complex, and deeply human narrative that reminds us that even the most successful, influential people are still capable of extraordinary achievement and ordinary failure. His legacy remains contested and complex, illuminating the best and most problematic aspects of our modern age. Thank you for joining us on this journey through the remarkable life of Bill Gates. We hope this exploration has given you not just facts and chronology, but insight into one of the most consequential figures of our time, in all his brilliance, all his flaws, and all his complexity. Thank you so much for listening to Bill Gates, the Architect of the Digital Revolution, here on Ecolib. What did you think of this biography? Did Bill Gates's story inspire you, challenge your perceptions, or make you think differently about technology, wealth, and philanthropy? We'd love to hear your thoughts. Please leave a comment below sharing what resonated with you most and what you'd like to learn about next. If you found this audiobook valuable, please give it a like and share it with others who might enjoy it. And don't forget to subscribe to Ecolib for more in-depth biographies of the people who shaped our world. Speaking of which, if you enjoyed learning about Bill Gates, you won't want to miss our biography of his close friend and mentor, Warren Buffett. Discover how the Oracle of Omaha built his investment empire and why he's known as one of the greatest investors of all time. Click on the video appearing on your screen now to continue your journey through the lives of extraordinary individuals.